Hello and welcome along to the Unplugged Pod, where we discuss everything to do with the world of switching off in a world that's always on. I'm David, a journalist, and as ever, I'm joined by Mr. Unplugged, Hector Hughes.
And today we have Grace Andrews. Grace is the marketing director for Team Steve Bartlett. So big into the world of podcasting, content online. I'm really looking forward to getting into where she sees that space and how that relates to unplugging. Looking forward to it.
Grace, thank you very much for coming along to the podcast today. I know it's not quite Diary of a CEO backdrop, but nonetheless, it's a bit sort of makeshift my flat into a studio. So thank you for joining us.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
So Grace, what do you do to unplug?
For me, getting unplugged is anything outside. So right now I'm obsessed with running. I broke my foot last year, so I found a whole new sense of gratitude for the ability to run and exercise when you don't have it and you can't do it. All you want to do is that. So for me, the time when I really switch off, not only from the digital world, but from all the noise and everything that goes on in my world, is when I'm running. It's when my thoughts are clear. It's when my best ideas come. It's when I get really excited about things.
Are you listening to anything or just kind of running your thoughts? Music?
Everything and anything. Sometimes nothing, sometimes podcasts, sometimes this morning I really didn't want to go out and it was I needed my energy playlist.
I think running's a weird one though, because if you're listening to podcasts and music,
you're still tuned in.
It depends what your definition of unplugging is, I suppose. I know for Hector it might be the Himalayas, just the wind and the mountains.
I'm not there yet.
No, seeing for sure.
I think you could tune out to that as well. And there's something just about the kind of motion of running that does take you out of yourself a bit. And so sometimes I agree. I think sometimes it's better, great to go and run and not listen to anything. But actually, if that's going to be what gets you out the door, if you really want to listen to this podcast or music or whatever it is, then it's got to be worth doing. I
think my definition of unplugged is uncontactable. For me right now in this stage of my life, the noise comes from people being able to get hold of me. So if no one can get hold of me and it's just me, my thoughts, and maybe stimulated by a podcast, but a lot of the time I'll tune out as well. It's just kind of background noise. And that's where my thoughts run.
I mean, how contactable are you? Because we were going to talk about your job in social media. What does it actually look like?
Always on?
Always on. You know what's terrifying is we were looking at our screen time, which is so relevant to this podcast. We were looking at our screen time this week because we were creating some content around it, and mine was the worst in the entire company. Second to Steve. Steve is online from the moment, he wakes up to the minute he goes to sleep. He does prioritize his sleep. But yeah, not good.
I like the way you didn't give any official statistics there either. You just said not good, so it just lets my brain run away with 14, 16, 18 hours.
Whatever you're imagining there.
Yeah, we'll go there. All right, might be worth just you giving a bit of context to how you sort of found yourself in the industry you're in and social media and everything to do with that.
Of course. So I started out in journalism when the pandemic was all rolling out and coming about. So this is kind of skipping forward to that stage. Before that, I did the uni, I did loads of internships, I did traveling, and then I was right, journalism. And then the pandemic rolls around. No one's working in journalism who doesn't already work in it because it's so hard to get work experience. It's so hard to get your foot in the door when everything shuts down. No one knows what's going on. We're in this state of fear. So I kind of turned to social media journalism because that was something I could freelance and take control of, and I could work from home and do it myself and kind of give content to these different industries and different news platforms. And quite quickly, the news became very depressing. So it kind of switched from slightly exciting and what's going on? Masks have gone out of stock, crazy stories, to death counts and death tolls. And I was this is not something I can be in every day. So I actually ended up transitioning out of the journalism side of things into just focusing on social media and really bringing up all the small businesses whose physical shop fronts had closed. That was what I was really interested in. I was I literally reached out to my local Facebook groups and Facebook communities. And I was who is struggling to reach their consumer and customer right now? I'll help you. And I did a lot of pro bono work to get started to kind of build up my experience. And then, I was freelancing. Pandemic kind of came to an end, thank goodness. And was working with some really cool brands and really cool businesses, and I really loved being able to elevate their businesses online, especially for people who didn't have that skill set. So it felt like a way where I could provide connection between customers that they couldn't reach with like their physical stores or their ancient website. And so I set up and gave them this platform through social media, and it was all going really, really well. Loving it. I was loving freelancing and wasn't looking for a full-time role at that point. After years and years of trying to find any work post-uni, I was now in like a very comfortable position. And then this job post rolls around from Stephen Bartlett. And at the time, Stephen Bartlett had just left his incredible social media agency that he'd built in Manchester. They work with the biggest brands in the world. He, in the social media marketing world, is like up there, number one, especially in the UK. And as someone who was aspiring to kind of grow in the industry, he posts this job post for a social media manager, and I go, that's probably not an opportunity I should miss. So I kind of was in this, it's always the way when you're not really looking and then the thing comes around. And within 2 weeks of kind of speaking to Dom, who's Steve's manager, I was in the door and I was working for Stephen Bartlett, who wasn't a dragon on Dragon's Den at the time, hadn't written the book. The podcast had 8,000 subscribers on YouTube. For perspective, we've now got 4 million. So it was much smaller, much kind of closer-knit team, and we were just starting out. So it was me, the podcast producer, and Steve's manager. And that's where it all began.
How long ago was that?
Nearly 3 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And because we're talking to what I guess we could call an old school journalist nowadays in David. And there is this sense that, with social media, how we consume, get news, all of these kind of things is changing rapidly. And you are now working and helping run, one of the very big podcasts in the world. Like, what's your perspective on that? And you must see some crazy numbers for downloads and just how people are interacting with this. Like, where do you see it all going?
In terms of like how we engage with social media?
Not so much that, but just how we consume our content, I guess.
I mean, we've seen, since I've been there, we've seen the rise of the podcast and its long form, piece of media as an alternative to TV and movies, and people are choosing to tune into long form podcasts in the same way they would with a documentary, because we've started to film them. We were very late in the UK to filming podcasts, so we were early as the Diary of a CEO, but really compared to the rest of the world, in the US specifically, we were quite late. And the podcast has transformed into a show. I think, we film them, there's production setups, they go across YouTube, they go across video formats, they go across social media. So that's one piece. I think the podcast has merged this world between sort of digital and traditional, and we're now seeing podcasts being shown on, our podcast is on BBC iPlayer, for example. You've got podcasts that are going into Netflix and going into all these kind of mainstream places. So there's like this hybrid world that's emerging, which is quite interesting. But there's clearly a desire for this long form piece of content, because the podcast, helped by the pandemic, funnily enough, like the podcast numbers have continued to grow year on year. And then you've got this other side of things where we've seen the emergence of short form video content to almost counteract that. So 3 years ago, TikTok was still kind of that kids app that no one in millennial age group was downloading because it was only for Gen Z, and Instagram didn't have Reels, YouTube Shorts didn't exist. So we've seen the emergence of the short form, instant gratification, very addictive form of media as well, which always kind of exists, but has been like super prevalent in the last few years. So I think we've seen a lean into both sides of things, and both have emerged at the same time, and actually both work hand in hand, because one can promote and engage with the other, and it provides a community for the other. So it's interesting. That's kind of what we've seen happen over the last 3 years.
Yeah, I think the long form, short form debate's really interesting, because definitely podcasts, the long form aspect of podcast was in many ways a bit of a kickback to how little experts on television were given, right? So you've got like 2 minutes to explain, what's happening in Israel, or explain like the concept of breathing and health and stuff like that. And so to give experts in their field just the opportunity to sit down, not interrupt them, talk for 5, 7, 9 minute monologues and have this like longer discourse was obviously really key to podcasts being super successful in the US and now in the UK. But it is still the short form that hooks people in, right? I mean, you look at like the trailers or the first 30 seconds of the Diary of the CEO podcast. I mean, it's really, really explosive and like really hits you to get you in initially. So it is interesting that long form clearly is like how podcasts started, but that short form hook is still like the absolute key to it.
I think when it comes to podcasting, you need, as you said, you need that hook and you need that grabby piece to send people to the long form. And it's taken us a while to get sort of the same numbers we're getting on social that we're getting across our long form, because you really have to spend a long time pulling people in. But unless you're on YouTube, you know, if you're only on the podcast audio platforms, Spotify, Apple, all of the other ones, there's no really, they're getting better, but there's no real new audience opportunity. You search, your friends tell you, you send a link. There's no searchability, there's no feed. There is now. There's no feed, there's no way to, the discoverability is really limited. So you need that organic and you need that paid social piece in order to draw those new eyes in and grow. Like that is your growth mechanism that complements the long form, really.
Also, like the numbers, I think sometimes we can get a bit desensitized by numbers, but some of them are crazy. Like you said, 4 million YouTube subscribers, right? And I know this isn't an exact science because I'm sure Diary CEO's audience is really global. But like, I mean, how many people in the UK? Like 65 million? So that's like one in 16 people in the UK subscribe to that podcast. And that's only people that are subscribed, right? Way more have seen clips or full length or been like nudged about it by someone else. Like it's a crazy number, I think.
We try not to dwell on the numbers too much. We love data. So we're obsessed with what's going on in the back end. How long are people watching for? When are they dropping off? How can we optimize that? But if you get too obsessed with the numbers, you're focused on like hitting the next milestone, you forget that they're actually people. What we always try and do is, you know, if we're just about to hit 4 million subscribers, we always try and visualize it. So either we'll send football stadiums or countries or, you know, anything to try and bring real meaning to it. But on top of that, we also care a lot more about the comments, the engagement, the messages, the emails, the people coming up to Steve at Talks crying and telling us how it's changed their life. Like that's our why and that's why we do it. And when you think about how many people it's reaching, it in one part blows my mind because I don't understand how this thing we're building is touching that many people. But at the same time, it kind of doesn't surprise me because the team, the effort, the energy that goes into it, it deserves to be reached by that many people.
And when you're talking about finding when people are dropping off, etc., like how created are the conversations? I guess part of it is going with the flow of the conversation versus hitting, as you say, the right kind of milestones to keep people engaged. How do you think about that?
It's a fine art, right? So, I mean, like, to be totally honest, we'll film with an expert, maybe say for 2 hours, and you'll see 1 hour 45 of it, sure. 1 hour 50. Most of it stays in. Is, you know, something if it's been repeated or we've talked about that topic 10 times in the last 10 episodes, we're like, that's not going to be super interesting to our audience. But what it does is rather than kind of cutting out conversations and curating conversations, it informs us about future guests and future conversations. So we'll go, oh, there was a really interesting spike on that specific conversation about caffeine. And we'll go, we should bring a caffeine expert in because clearly our audience really like that. So it's more about informing like the wider process as opposed to like really looking really focused and going, oh, we should have cut that section out. It's kind of it's a more informative, wider process. Yeah,
and is that on the, I guess you're optimizing for those long form listeners, that's the ultimate goal, right? Rather than optimizing for which one's going to go the most viral on YouTube, or a bit of both?
Our mission and our why is to create conversations that change people's lives and to leave people feeling more fulfilled or more whole or with a better idea of something than when they started. So whether that's more informed, whether that's educated on a certain topic, whether that's, you know, the ability to have a conversation, the desire to leave a job, the desire to kind of take control of their life, like whatever it is, we want them to leave having gained something. And that's our mission with all of these things. I think the virality is almost a byproduct of the experimentation that's going on behind the scenes because we do treat it as like a science. And
is there ever a conflict there? Because I do think, I've listened to the podcast and I do think it is life-changing and must have affected, you know, millions of people literally. But is there ever a conflict between the things that are going to be the most beneficial and the things that are going to generate the most views? Or do you find that naturally it's the most life-changing things that people tend to go for?
It's a balance, and we're learning all the time. We learn and we test every single title. We test every single thumbnail. So I know a lot of the time we've seen there'll be certain people who go, oh, well, that was just clickbait, as you do with any big creator, because that is kind of the point. Have we got you to watch? Are you watching? Do the tests show that more people clicked on this than anything else? Yes, but we don't want to be clickbait. We want to then follow up with that in the long form conversation. There's no point, and we've seen it's hugely damaging to average watch time. If you offer a clickbait title, as we all know, and then people are watching 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, nothing to do with the title. Average duration drops off a cliff. YouTube stops recommending your podcast. That's our worst nightmare. So it's all about finding that perfect balance of, has it drawn people in? And we have formulas for these things as well. We have formulas for everything from like title, thumbnail, everything, every part of it that we know works. So when it comes to like, we know it needs to be super unique. We know it needs to be super specific, but appeal to a wide enough audience. So there's like an art to that, because it sounds contradictory, but really, if you look at our titles, that's what we're doing. And every single title has 3 checkboxes that it must tick off before it even goes into the testing. So it's not like we've gone, oh, I know that one, lazy, Gen Z, chuck it in there, that's going to be provocative. Absolutely not. Like, everything we do is founded in science and data, and we've got a full-time data analyst, data scientist who is focused on this every single day and finding out, did we gain 0.5% through that title, or did we gain 0.2% through that thumbnail? So everything is curated, and I think really we put it into testing and we see what the results are. And it's not us deciding like that's going to be the hook, that's the clickbait. It's us putting 100 in and letting our audience choose through meta testing.
Where does this kind of personally, where do you come out for social media more generally? Because I think it highlights something really interesting about, you know, as you could say, just how it's possible to grab people's attention by what the thumbnail looks like or whatever it is. And I think the content that you guys put out really is improving and makes a huge difference. But obviously most of social media isn't like that. And there's a lot that gets served up that I think doesn't have a positive effect on people. And everything's rewriting our brain from, you know, not to be too tin hat unplugged man, but not only what we see online, but also the conversations we have, the books we read, like every content, all of the content we consume, you know, we are almost the sum of the content we consume. So how do you see social media more widely? Like where do you see that going? And I guess what's your hope for it?
It's very philosophical.
You're apparently like the sum of the 5 podcasters you listen to most. That's it.
Where do I see social media going? I think personalization is a huge thing. So I think from both the consumer and the brands and the people putting the content out there, I think people expect, due to like machine learning and AI, to have a much more personalized experience when they go on their social media apps now. So whether that's the content they're being served, the brands they follow, the emails they receive, they want it all to be a very personalized experience. And I think on the flip side, as a person and consumer, that means also curating the stuff I see much more and with like a fine-tuned comb. So whether that's kind of, people are much more actively muting and blocking and curating the feed to make sure that they're seeing what they want to see. And I think we're really leaning into that, both from like brands so focused on hyper personalization, it's like the buzzword for 2024, and also taking control of what you're seeing and making sure that social media is a positive experience for you, because really we do have to hold ourselves accountable a little bit and take personal responsibility for what we are seeing online. If you don't like what you're seeing over and over, you can control that. Yes, the algorithms dictate to a degree, but you can also tell them what you want to see and tell them what you don't want to see. And all of the platforms have introduced tools and features this year that allow you to do that better than we've ever done before. So I think there's that side of it. And then I also think that brands like hold responsibility as well, and businesses and content creators. And these are conversations that we're having all the time. I know there's more and more conversations about transparency in terms of advertising and influencer marketing and the blurred lines in personal branding and entrepreneurship and managing companies and investing in companies and all of this that's being played out in real time online. And no one really has the answers, and it's a kind of a huge grey space. But I think that for me is something I'm thinking about a lot at the moment. I know a lot of people online are as well, because of this emergence of the personal brand, which really, like, that phrasing didn't exist in the same way 3-4 years ago. So we're like seeing this all play out in real time, and I find that dynamic very fascinating.
And you don't have to give any specifics, but I guess how many issues does that throw up? Because, I mean, obviously running Unplugged in uncharted territory, shit goes up, and like if Airbnb go into a new city, stuff goes wrong. And like I really think you are pioneering in the podcast space, and you don't need me to tell you that. Does that throw up a lot of problems, challenges, where things go wrong?
I think we're so clear of why we're doing what we're doing that it doesn't really matter too much about all the new features and the new ideas and the new trends and the new concepts that come up, because we'll adapt those as they come up, and we're always kind of looking for the next thing. And our culture of experimentation means we're always trying new things and we're looking to do things differently. But when you're really, really clear on your why and you're driving back to your mission, it doesn't really matter if things come up or go away, because you're just so focused on that end goal and your moonshot and why you're doing it, that as long as you don't derail from that, I think you'll be okay.
It certainly comes across when you talk as well. Like your why is like absolutely there, and not just yours, but like the wider team as well. So that's testament to the team that's been created there. Yeah, there's like a US podcaster, I can't remember who it was, that spent like 3 months only following things to do with puppies across all social media platforms, right? And then at the end of 3 months, everything that was served up on like the search function and you're suggested and watch this, watch that, was just like puppies playing around. And he was doing it to test like, it's like to kind of challenge what you said, that like you can curate your own like reality, if you like, across like socials. And he said he was actually surprised that like big tech wasn't trying to trick him or anything. Like if he only followed puppies running around at the end of 3 months, every single platform he had, that's what was served up to him. So yeah, there obviously is like an element of personal responsibility. So it's really difficult not to click on the stuff that you know is like junk food.
I think we are starting to have healthier conversations around our relationships with social media. I mean, the fact that, Unplugged has become so popular is no surprise to me, or any form of retreat or meditation or breathwork or wellness as an industry, my goodness. It's no surprise, because there's this need. There's this need for us to take a step back to like our ancestors and, what we used to do in our roots, on top of this desire for real life connection, because we've obviously gone so online and so away from in real life connection that there's this like innate human desire for it. So I think we're starting to understand that need. Like I think maybe 5-10 years ago, when these platforms were just like absolutely blowing up and everyone was so excited by them and it was the best thing since sliced bread. And then we've gone, did we take a step too far that way? Maybe. Let's like make sure we're bringing other elements into our life as well. And I think that's becoming a more mainstream conversation. But obviously we've got this whole next generation, growing up, who will have to learn that as well. And it's not something that you're just like taught in school. Maybe it will be. I don't know.
Well, yeah, we can't be far from that, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Like teaching people in school.
Well, it must be. I know the volume of 10 to 13-year-olds on Snapchat, for example, as their main source of communication above in real life conversations. Like that's got to start becoming part of teaching and curriculum, I think.
Yeah, they've started banning phones in classrooms, which I guess starts the conversation. But it's going to be interesting. Yeah, I guess you kind of stuff needs to break before you go and fix it. But it's definitely, I think COVID was almost a canary in the, or almost a smokescreen, in the sense that there was a lot of issues. I have a kind of younger sister, and her generation grew up with social media all through their teenage years, and just absolutely rife with mental health issues, etc. Because it really does, you develop differently, and I think it does create a more kind of nervous demeanor, anxious, all of these kind of things.
The comparison.
Exactly.
The comparison is killer.
That's it. Yeah.
The expectation and the comparison, especially. I mean, as a young female, also growing up in that world, like the images you're served, it's almost, because it's so at your fingertips and instantaneous, it's almost as bad as like the magazine generation and of the 2000s, who only saw beautiful women edited on the front cover of magazines, and that toxic culture that it created is like, well, when I was growing up, all we saw was like the most incredible people on Instagram were the ones who got the most likes, incredible in inverted commas, the ones who we saw as this idealized like sense of feminine or whatever, like they were the ones who got more likes. So you're like, well, if I need to get more likes, I need to look like that. And it's like this vicious circle and vicious cycle. But I don't know if it's the world I'm in and who I'm deciding to surround myself with and what I view online and how I curate my feeds. But there are more and more people having much more kind of real life conversations now on social media and representing real life people on these platforms, and it just feels a bit more real and honest. Of course, there are still corners of the internet that don't look like that, so that's why I bring in that personal responsibility piece. And
I mean, one of the perks of the job must be that you must have learned a lot from just kind of being there with all these conversations. And I guess on that comparison piece, what's interesting is it sometimes never goes away. So I mean, you have some of the biggest people in the world coming on the podcast and talking about how they still feel like they're not enough, and whatever stage you get to, there's always someone higher, right? There's always, we could get to this next stage, and I guess it's facing up whatever demons are driving that kind of really cures it. So how would you say your worldview has changed from working on the podcast, seeing all the guests you have?
I think the most interesting thing about the variety of guests we've had on the podcast, from athletes to movie stars to authors to experts in their niche, is that 9 out of 10 times they all have very similar stories. They have a shared sense of struggle, and they all want to kind of, I don't know, give back to the world in like a good way. And actually they're not driven by money anymore, or they were driven by money at one point. And you start to see, like, despite all these people coming from all different backgrounds and all different paths and walks of life and different industries, that there's lots of similarities between us all. And we're all actually kind of, sounds profound, but like there's one human race, and we're all kind of figuring it all out together. And you've got the CEOs of multi-billion pound companies, multi-billion dollar companies, who are still figuring out and make mistakes and fail and are learning and don't get it right all the time. And they're the ones who are actually doing the best because they're willing to kind of own up to it, and the ego is able to strip away. And then you've got kind of the movie stars who look amazing on screen and seem to have the perfect life and put all together, but actually, they're really struggling with mental health behind the scenes. I mean, look at Lewis Capaldi. He's talking about his Tourette's that's being caused by the stress and anxiety that's been induced by the music industry, and he's opening up for the first time on our podcast about it. Like, it's where I think you see, because of the long form and because they're allowed to speak, and because we're not driven by a set of 10 questions or an agenda where we have to get something out of this person, they're allowed to just like relax. And you often see their shoulders just like drop, and they just relax, and they'll often finish, often they'll cry, and it's very emotional because it's a very vulnerable place to be. And they'll say that felt like therapy because they were just allowed to speak, which is like a real rarity in interviews or media or anything like that. And I think what we've found from that is we have a lot more in common than you think. Even like the billionaire, Lewis Capaldi, whoever it is, you can always kind of find that point of commonality or that like point of interest, which I think was quite surprising to me. But in hindsight isn't, because of course, we're all humans.
Everyone's making it up as they go along.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's all just messy behind the scenes.
Yeah. And that's almost the perfect antidote to the kind of perfect Instagram picture where it looks like they've all got it figured out, and then, an hour later you listen to them on the podcast talking about how tough the last year's been. And,
that's why I love it. I love the long form. You just can't get that context on the short form. And it's really interesting that like TikTok are bringing out 15-minute duration. Like that's what they're just about to introduce from 10-minute, because they've seen such high engagement on 10-minute clips. They're pushing to 15, 30, 40. Suddenly TikTok's going to be the new YouTube. Suddenly people are vlogging for 40 minutes on TikTok. Like that's the way it's going for sure. And
just excuse my ignorance, but if you're talking about using TikTok where you're kind of scrolling through, is it just people will stop for 10 minutes and watch a video?
Exactly. So our most popular clips in the last 6 months have all been at the 7+ minute mark. Millions and millions of views. So there is a demand for it. There's a need for it in that younger generation too. People want context.
Yeah, it's amazing how people are using TikTok for like everything, like TikTok search engine optimization. If you want to put up a nail on the wall, then you go to TikTok and type it in, which is mental.
If I'm like going to a city, I will like TikTok it. Like I'll find the best places to eat, I'll find the best hotel to stay in, I'll find the best things to do because the best reviews are on TikTok.
Yeah, and then there's just an element of like, if you're trying to look at restaurants on Google, you kind of click into these crappy links. It's pretty rubbish. But if you actually see someone filming in there, what they're having, it does make sense, to be honest.
Yeah. It's so present tense as well. Right?
Yeah.
Like a Google review, you scroll back to 4 years ago and make a judgment, whereas like TikTok, it's like, this is what I ate last night, the seasonal menu.
Yeah. And is that, like, is it easy to not get sucked into, because obviously the scroll is addictive, like is it easy when you go on there, or do you
my relationship with social media, I think because I'm in it every day, I see it as work. So when I switch off, like most people like close their laptop and switch off from their emails, for me it's like closing all my apps down for the day. So I struggled to differentiate between like social media for fun and social media for work, because for me it's all work. Like if I'm on there, it's like a different part of my brain switch on. I'm looking for trends. I'm looking not for entertainment or for like relaxation that some people do. I'm looking for how we can stay ahead. What can I share with the group today? What can I find that's going to put us ahead? What are they doing? What can we learn from that? And even, because I also have my own personal brand, so I'm looking at it from that perspective as well. So I love it, but in the same way, we have to switch off from work sometimes and focus over here and focus over there. Like for me, that means closing all of that down.
What's the goal with your personal brand?
Pardon?
What's the goal with your personal brand?
My goal with my personal brand is to become an industry leader in the social media marketing space and the creator marketing space and podcast marketing. So I think that's a really important question as well, because I think so many people are building personal brands for the sake of building personal brands. I couldn't tell you what half the people on my LinkedIn feed do. I think they're all coaches of some degree.
Full-time posting on LinkedIn.
Full-time personal brand marketing people who have gone viral on LinkedIn. Like I don't get any of that. Like it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, there's lots of people who like start posting to get, I don't know, more business or whatever it is, and then they end up like quitting their startup or whatever it is to like. And
I just wonder where it's going. Like that does kind of concern me slightly, and it concerns me when people are buying into it. These people who have no marketing experience in the real world, like I get really confused by all of that, to be honest. And I try to kind of stay one step away from it and not get into the way of this like LinkedIn influencer writing and with this crappy ideas that actually you finish the post and you didn't learn anything. Like that's my worst nightmare. Like I want people to finish reading my content and go, I want to share that with someone, or I need to follow this person. Like that was really informative and that was really valuable in a specific industry. So for me, the way I measure that isn't by likes or follows or viral posts. It's by DMs behind the scenes. Like has someone messaged me to go, that post really resonated with me. Can I ask you a question about this? Or we're doing an event next week. I'd love you to speak at it. Or we're starting a podcast. I'd love you to come and talk about your marketing experience. Or can you do a consultation with our team, because we're really inspired by the way you look at this project and how you launch the book. Like for me, that's what a personal brand is. It's being known online for what you're known for offline. And I think there's kind of got this confusion because of the way LinkedIn's changed specifically as a platform between that and just posting. And I think it comes back to your why. Like, why are you doing it? Can you tell me in an elevator pitch or a mission statement what your goal is here? For me, it's to become well known in this specific industry and have the ability to talk about it as much as possible, because I'm obsessed with it, as opposed to just posting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you are, as Dave said earlier, incredibly clear on the why, both for the podcast and yourself. How's that happened?
It didn't happen overnight. Yeah, the podcast did. We always knew we wanted to be the world's biggest podcast that reached the most people and build it into so much more than a podcast. So we call it a show because it has a 10 camera production setup. It has a team of 30 behind it. It's on airlines, it's in prisons, it's going into gym equipment, it's on iPlayer, it's in all these different places. So it's much more than a podcast to us. It is a show. And, there's products that live alongside it. I know you've got the conversation cards at Unplugged. And for us, it's a media brand. It's a media company. So that's what that is. And we're very clear that where that's going. And that's always been the case. It's kind of evolved and it was adapted and things have changed. And we've, maybe the past going like this a little bit, just like we're figuring things out as we go. But we always knew that we wanted to impact as many people as we possibly could. My personal brand really evolved. Like I used it at the start to gain new clients and as an opportunity to build like a digital reputation, because especially in the pandemic when I'm sitting in my childhood bedroom with my laptop screen, like how on earth can I reach people? Okay, let me elevate myself into an online world where I can reach millions of people at my fingertips if that's what I desired. I also use it as my playground, because It's my opportunity to be messy and figure things out and do all my learnings. So my Instagram and my LinkedIn, I try new things. I test new concepts and I figure out, because I'd much rather do it there than to an audience of tens of millions on Stephen's channel. So it's my opportunity to be messy and figure out and keep learning so that I can stay ahead. Because how can I be someone who suggests, that I want to be at the top of this industry if I'm not demonstrating how to do it along the way or learning how to do it? Because the industry is evolving so quickly and so rapidly that I need that place to be messy. So that's kind of what I see it as well.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the scale, like a 10 camera shoot, 30 people part of the production process to create such a massive podcast. What would you say to someone then that is literally starting from zero? Clearly not everyone's going to have the reach that Stephen Bartlett and Dario, the CEO, has, but like if you're starting from absolute zero, would you go back to the why? Someone's 50 and they want to start a podcast. They think, how can I possibly compete with like someone like you who's like grown up with these trends and like completely obsessed with it, but still wants to create a podcast? Like, what would your advice be?
Or two blokes or 6 episodes in.
Yeah, is this consultancy? I'll send you an invoice afterwards.
There's
not 30 people behind it. It's one editor, one.
But I mean, quickly on that, it sounds a lot, 30 people, but then if you think about how many people work at the Times or the Evening Standard, and I mean the impact.
Or
like, how many people?
Parkinson nightly show.
Yeah, exactly. And then how many people are consuming
documentaries or?
So if anything, it's a very
yeah.
small team given the reach.
Yeah, we're hiring like crazy.
It's
what did you ask me?
What tips would you go for?
What tips?
Out of interest, what positions are you? What kind of roles do you need to add, or are you adding?
Do you know people?
I've personally spoken for, but
so let's do one. So if you are thinking about starting a podcast, you don't know where to start, you don't know if there's a place for you, it feels saturated, like all of these things. Again, go back to like your why, like why do you want to do it? Because if you don't do it for why you want to do it, you won't find enjoyment in it and you won't be consistent, and they're the most important things. Like you've got to enjoy doing it, otherwise you'll do 3 episodes. I think the 90% of podcasts produced don't get past episode 3 or like some crazy stat like that. So I mean, I imagine for most people they thought it was a good idea. It was actually quite a lot of effort and they gave up on that one. So I think knowing your why, knowing why you want to do it, and knowing who you want to talk to. And I think that's really key at the start. Like, you're not going to speak to everyone. That's not how it works. That's not how social media works. You can't throw out content and just hope it gets picked up by some certain audiences. I think you have to have a good idea of who you want to speak to. Like, if you're on the street, the type of person you'd want to speak to, whether that's an age range, a demographic, an industry professional, or like what career they're in, what stage of life they're in, motherhood, whatever it is. I think it's helpful to have that in mind, because there are millions of podcasts out there and you will be competing for audience because there's more podcasts than we can ever consume in our lifetime. So I think having a good awareness of where you want to fit in, and then you can kind of mold that as you get started. The most important thing is just consistency. Like, anyone I ever speak to, it's like, oh, we did a season last year. I think we'll start it up again this year. What's the point? It's like posting an Instagram post, not coming back for a year and expecting your audience to still be waiting. As I said, there's so many podcasts out there. You need to be so consistent with what you're doing if you're serious about it, and if you do want to grow, and if you do want to nurture that community, because it depends why you're doing it. Some people want to produce a podcast and it be their main thing we do. Diary of a CEO, main thing we do. Or maybe it's a growth mechanism for your brand, or a lead gen magnet, or like whatever it is. You need to know why you're doing it and what you're doing it for as part of your overall business strategy. I know some people who their business strategy is just to go on people's podcasts to leverage their audience to grow their business without actually having their own podcast. Like, it's another media channel and it's another marketing opportunity essentially. So I think being clear on what role it plays in the direction you're going as a business, whether it is the business or it's an element of it, and what you're hoping to achieve from it, and setting those goals, setting those KPIs and working towards them consistently. Like, there is no point if you're podcasting and releasing one today, releasing one in a couple of weeks, taking a break, coming back next year, rebrand, 3 episodes in. Like, if we see it over and over and over, you wonder why the biggest podcasts in the UK from a year ago, 2 years ago aren't around anymore, because they just stopped being consistent they decided to go to once every, 3 weeks, every so often, maybe drop in a solo episode or whatever. They just lost their standards. So I think going with your standards, going with your why, going with knowing what part of your business strategy it plays, and like you'll be pretty good. You'll be already in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide.
I can't believe you don't drink coffee, because you're dialed in. Like,
I'm just like
have you always been so high energy? It's great.
Do you know what? I will leave here and I'll go and be like a complete recluse for the rest of the evening, because I'm such I'm such a person of extremes. Like I love talking about this stuff. Like this gives me energy. Like I love doing this sort of thing. But I'm what they call like a extroverted introvert, I think.
Yeah.
It's like I will need my social battery like recharging time later, and I'll go home and I'll just be like eating my dinner. I was like, no one talk to me, no one talk to me. I need both, but like this sort of stuff, this is like what I live for. I love this. It's like all I think about every single day. So that I get to talk about it with people is really cool to me.
And because I mean, obviously the way you talk about the podcast can really get the passion. Is the office just full of that, full of yous? You know what? Are you one of a kind?
God no. I actually sent a message in our Slack channel yesterday because we had probably the most people I think we've ever had in the office. So we work full time in the office every day because that's really important to us. We couldn't move at the pace we do if we weren't all together. Like I know so many different companies function with like hybrid models and everything. Our culture is we work in the office. You don't have to work with us, that's fine. But that's what we do because we do our best work together. And we were in the office yesterday and we had one birthday and one anniversary. And the energy and the buzz and the music, it was like 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. I was like, most people are at home on Teams in their pajama bottoms, like just scraped, rolled out of bed with a cup of tea. And I just sent a message. We've got a gratitude channel. And I just said, this is so unlike me as well. I don't like I literally was like, might delete this later. But I just felt so grateful to be surrounded by people who have that same, honestly, I'm probably on the lower end of the energy spectrum compared to most people on the team. And it's because we have this shared mission and shared drive and shared real tangible culture that makes us all like love what we do. Like I genuinely think I'm so lucky. Like I'm so lucky that I sometimes wake up in the morning, I'm tired. I leave work so energized. Like it's the other way around for most people. And like how cool is that? I get to do something that I'm, clearly quite passionate about and get to share that experience with like all of these experts in their own industries. So I'm learning from like our trailer editors and I'm learning from our data scientists and our head of experimentation and our brand partnerships team who are all teaching me so much because we're all on this shared mission. And so we get to just like overlap on all the knowledge and everything we're learning from each other. But yeah, it starts from that shared mission and culture piece, which I think is the missing piece of the puzzle to a lot of teams these days. And I feel really lucky that that's been like instilled in us from the start.
Yeah, it's super inspiring to hear someone that loves their job so much. And what about, I think it's cool, Hector, we were talking briefly about like the creating versus consuming, right? And like most people consume way more than they create. And it's a really difficult thing to do, but if you can create, let's not say more, but like a percentage of what you consume, it's a much healthier balance.
Yeah.
Do you find that, or is it just impossible because you have to consume so much to get to the point where you create something good?
I think I'm in a very different situation to most, I'd probably suggest. So it's like, it's not normal how much content I consume. Both from, like, it's not the average. Like, I'm sure, like, even when we looked across our team, as I said, like, my screen time and everything was so much higher because I'm just constantly in it. And I'm obsessed with, like, leading on trends and knowing what's coming up next before anyone else. I'm very competitive, in case it hasn't come across. And we all are. And for me, that was a case of like, okay, be ahead. Like, know what's coming, be plugged in to kind of all of this world. And it means I'm consuming and creating probably a lot more than most people on average. But I do have this ability to switch off from it all as well. So yes, there's blurred lines between like work and play. For me, it's all kind of, I hate this concept of like work-life balance, because for me, it's just all under this umbrella of life, and the ratios change when our life changes and evolves and different priorities come up and go. So I don't think it's always like 50% work, 50% life. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. So there's blurred lines between it all, but I do have this ability to be like, okay, cold turkey, switch off from it all and go and focus on running.
And does Stephen, I mean, because he's almost the show, like does he have that switch off?
Yeah, he does. He's very good at prioritizing like the things that matter to him the most. So he is obsessed with work, like it's no secret. He also loves spending time with his girlfriend, and his health is his number one priority, as well as his sleep. So like those kind of things are non-negotiables for him in his life. And it's just a case of, as I said, there are times when it's like a lot of work and less of the other things, and times when it's a lot of the other things and less of work. And it's kind of this like ever evolving journey, I guess. But no, he does his own things. Like he gyms every single day without fail for an hour and a half or whatever. And that's his version of switch off, I guess.
Cool.
Great stuff.
Nice
Yeah,
out,
fantastic.
That was very close to an hour that absolutely flew by, Grace. So yeah, thank you very much.
No worries, thanks guys.
And where can we find you and your personal brand that I'm sure you're going to scale to infinity and all the rest of it? So we should get in early, right?
Whenever I have time. I'm the.socialclimber on Instagram and just Grace Andrews on LinkedIn.
And do you see, just quickly, I know we've already done that outros, but do you see those as, you were talking about kind of just one life rather than work-life balance? So, I mean, I guess they're almost one and the same, which is you at work and the social climber. Like, do you see them as different things, or is it just all you, really?
I mean, so before Social Climber and like my brand was my opportunity to get new work. And then when I came into a full-time job, I didn't need to look for work anymore. In fact, I had no time to look for work anymore. So those platforms kind of took a back seat. And then 3 months in, Steve was like, right, you need to start doing some talks. And I was like, sorry, I need to start doing what? Because it obviously helps build my authority in the space, and it helps me learn, and it helps me connect with people, and it helps me understand my thinking better. Like speaking on stage has been the best thing for kind of developing my thoughts about various different subjects. So that was when the personal brand started to come into play again. And I started to use it as this opportunity to kind of get speaking engagements and develop my authority in the space. And so it's, all of this sort of stuff is really encouraged by the team. We've got, I think, 3 or 4 members of the team who've now started doing podcasts, which is just amazing to me. And I'm very proud, and they're building their personal brands, and because it all is connected. Like you get a podcast, the podcast gets more recognition, you get more authority in the space, you become kind of a thought leader in your own right within our team. We have a team of, our team becomes a team of industry leading experts. It's all like a self-fulfilling cycle. So for me, it's all, my life is, blurred. All the lines are super blurred right now because I'm at an age where I have very few responsibilities outside of what I do for work, really. Beyond getting my bills paid each month, like I don't have any people dependent on me. So I can be quite selfish at this stage of my life and focus on my career and things that I love doing. And I'm sure that will evolve and change. And, at some point it will probably go, okay, career, but like actually what are the other parts of my life that I want to make sure are getting filled all the time as well, because it will switch and change out.
Love it. Well, Grace, a joy. Thank you so much for coming, and hopefully chat soon.
Thanks guys.
Nice.
Great stuff. That was awesome. Love it.